Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the DECI 101 webinar. Um, this webinar is an introduction to the Designated Erosion Control Inspector program. My name is Maya Blauer. I'm a senior civil engineer with Lake County Stormwater Management Commission, and this is our second year doing this 1-hour webinar. And this webinar is specifically designed for new and prospective DECIs. So it is not our annual DECI training. That'll be mid-February. SMC will send a registration link and information for that webinar. This is just a 1-hour intro to the program for those who are new or not so new, who might still have questions about the program. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions you might have during this webinar. So just a quick welcome and the agenda for the webinar. If you want us to keep track of your attendance, please change your Zoom ID to your actual name. You will receive one PDH for today. The PDF of the slide deck will be posted on the DECI webpage. And also, we will make the recording available if you have any colleagues that couldn't join today and they still want the information. We will make this recording available so they can look at it and attend it at their leisure. I want to thank all the SMC staff helping today. Tim Cook is also on the webinar, so him and I will be able to answer questions throughout this presentation. Please stay till the end of the presentation because the certificate will be posted in the chat at the end of the presentation. If you are on a mobile device and you can't download the the certificate and you still want it, please feel free to email me at the end of the presentation and I will send you the PDF of the certificate. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and encourage you to ask questions during the Q&A session via the chat feature. So what will we cover today in the webinar? We will cover the description of the DECI program, benefits of becoming a DECI, what is a DECI and how to become one, DECI responsibilities, non-compliance issues, and in the second part of the presentation, we'll go through some common soil erosion sediment control measures on construction sites and how to inspect them properly. So what is the DECI program? It's not an original program. It has been modeled after other regional programs in Delaware, Georgia, and Michigan. And the purpose of the program is to provide education, compliance, and ultimately good water quality in the county. It uses the basic NPDES structure, and it was adopted by SMC in January 2006, and we have had training workshops since 2007. Everyone, DECI or not, is invited to participate in the trainings. And it's important to have this program because the IEPA ILR 10 permit already asks for qualified personnel to do inspections. And it seems that that permit will move towards having certified personnel. Excuse me. And the DECI program is helping with that goal. So what are the goals of the DECI program? There are 4 main goals: to increase awareness and monitoring of soil erosion sediment control, improve communication between regulatory agency and developer for soil erosion sediment control issues, reduce suspended sediment levels in receiving waters, streams, and lakes, and ultimately improve water quality. But I think the program does more than that. It provides eyes, boots, and experience on the ground. DECI, the Designated Erosion Control Inspector, is also a liaison to the applicant and can sometimes translate complex regulatory requirements. And ultimately, the goal of the program is to keep water quality high for the benefit of all, not just us, but also future generations. So what are some of the benefits for those of you on the call who are not DECIs yet and are curious about the program? What are some of the benefits of becoming a DECI? Well, for one, the Watershed Development Ordinance, the WDO, requires certain types of projects to have a DECI doing inspections, and we'll see later in the presentation what kind of projects require DECIs. If your company does work in Lake County, it's beneficial to have an in-house DECI to cover this requirement. But also, if you plan on doing work in other counties, the field experience required for a DECI, which is 2 years of field experience, and not just classroom education, but actually being in the field and doing the work, is beneficial to show your soil erosion sediment control knowledge. Acquiring the DECI status is also useful if one plans to have a career in construction and soil erosion sediment control in any part of the country. And just to be clear, you don't have to work for a certain company to be a DECI. If you just want to have that knowledge and you are an independent contractor and you just want to do that kind of work in the county, that's also perfectly fine. So what is a DECI? As mentioned before, DECI is a liaison between applicant, developer, and enforcement officer. It is a trained and qualified soil erosion sediment control inspector, and it's employed by the applicant and not the permitting agency. The DECI can work for the applicant, but it's not required. And there's a current list of DECIs on the SMC DECI webpage, which gets updated once a month as more people become DECIs throughout the year. So how does one become a DECI? There are 4 requirements to become a DECI. 1 is to pass the DECI exam. 2, to complete an SMC-approved SCSC course, which is normally our annual DECI training. 3, submit a 1-page statement of qualifications that shows the 2 years cumulative field experience, but that requirement can be waived if you are a certified professional in erosion and sediment control or a certified erosion, sediment, and stormwater inspector. And once you submit all of those requirements, there's an SMC review and approval, and then we'll let you know if you meet the requirements to become a DECI. You can take the exam at any time. We actually recommend becoming familiar with the ordinance first, so you know where to look for answers. The exam is open book based on the ordinance, and it's been newly amended. The newly amended document, it's actually on this SMC website. Now we have just gone through a series of amendments, and the new document, it's actually now posted on the SMC website. In order for you to get the SMC approved SCSC course, you can attend the annual DECI training. But there are also, if you missed it for some reason, there are other approved courses listed on the SMC website, which can be taken at any time of the year in lieu of attending the workshop. When you submit the 1-page statement of qualifications, please be specific when outlining your field experience. It's kind of like a resume. List the work you did, such as inspection, reports, SWIP reviews, but SMC particularly focuses on the field experience. What kind of inspections did you do? What kind of BMPs you have inspected and you have looked at? And in order to become a DECI, there is no cost. So you can just go through these requirements, apply, and you can become a DECI free of cost. So as far as the SMC exam is concerned, there are 100 questions, and there are combinations of the ordinance requirements, the Watershed Development Ordinance requirements, and soil erosion sediment control practical application. So you must have some knowledge of field scenarios that the exam will ask you questions about, so you can be able to answer those. It's online and it's open book. It doesn't cost anything, and you have 3-hour limit to answer the 100 questions. And because it is an open book, you need a 90% or better to pass. And I've gotten this question before, but no, there is no study guide for the exam. You just need to get familiar with the ordinance and answer the questions. It may seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but don't worry. If you don't pass the first time, you can take it again. If you take it twice and do not pass, the exam will lock itself and you'll have to meet with some SMC staff to go over the wrong answers before your third attempt. And once you pass and submit all your documentation to SMC, you can become a DECI and your name will be added to the SMC list on the DECI webpage. As I've mentioned before, the list gets updated at the beginning of each month with the new names. If you are a DECI already and you may have switched companies, it's good practice to check the list every once in a while to make sure your name still appears. And if you have moved and you want us to have updated information about your new company, please send us an email so that we may change your credentials in our database, especially with the email, so you don't miss some important announcements and stuff like that regarding the program. Because we don't know when you move and how you change, so it's good to let us know when that happens. Okay, maintaining the DECI status. Now that you're a DECI, how do you stay on the list? So there is a relisting for everybody, regardless of how long they have been a DECI. There is a relisting every 3 years. We've just gone through one last year in 2023, so our next relisting will be in 2026. There has been an amendment a while ago, but it's worth mentioning because for those of you who are looking to be DECIs or just became DECIs, attendance at each annual DECI workshop between relisting is sufficient. Whereas before we needed 24 hours of education credits, now if you just participate at the annual DECI workshop between those two relistings, you will be fine. Alternatively, if you miss one of those webinars, you will be required to show 24 hours of education credits so you can relist next. So the easiest, least burdensome route to maintain your status is to attend every DECI workshop every single year if your goal is to stay on the list. What are some other ways to get education credits? Obviously, if you miss one and you need 24 hours for 3 years, the Illinois Association for Floodplain and Stormwater Management Conference, which happens every year, provides about 11 credits of education. There are others webinars, obviously like this one, that offer credits. Other workshops that are offered throughout Chicagoland. We do send out sometimes notifications, but check other organizations like Soil and Water Districts, other counties or private companies and national conferences such as StormCon and International Erosion Control Association Conference. Additional resources for continuing education are listed on the DECI webpage, so feel free to check that out. But the easiest way really is to make sure you attend every SMC DECI webinar. Now, I just want to mention a couple of things about our next relisting. I know it's a couple of years away, but in order to stay on the list, you must be active and listed on the DECI list to be able to relist. If you let your status lapse, you must start the process from the beginning to become listed again. Everyone who is a DECI who wants to maintain their status and be on the list must go through the process regardless of the year they became a DECI. So, for 2026, if you or somebody becomes a DECI in 2025, even though they've just become one, since we have to maintain this list every 3 years, they have to go through the relisting process as well. And the cost is $60, regardless of how long you've become a DECI. It is free to become a DECI, but in order to stay on the list on the year that we have a relisting, you must go through the process and pay your $60 fee. Obviously, you must have attended all DECI workshops between relistings. Alternatively, you must show 24 hours of appropriate education for the 3 years between the relistings. And education requirements are based on the year you became a DECI. If you become a DECI the same year as the relisting, there is no education requirement. So, if you've only been a DECI for 2 years, that's 16 hours. If you've only been a DECI for 1 year, that's 8 hours of education. So it goes by the year you actually become a DECI, but regardless of how long you've been a DECI, you must relist if you want to stay on that DECI list. We had some little bit of misunderstanding this last time around. I guess I wasn't clear enough that everybody, regardless of how long you've been a DECI, you have to relist if you want to maintain your status and be on the official DECI list. So I'm hoping that that's clear enough now. I will make sure that I will bring this information at our annual DECI webinar as well. Okay, as far as delisting, SMC has the authority and responsibility to suspend a DECI status for repeated or recurring noncompliance. Delisting procedures include formal notification to the DECI with a response request from basically we're saying, okay, it doesn't seem like you're doing the work that a DECI should be doing. Can you please let us know what's going on? And then based on that information, we make the decision whether or not, that's a strike. So in order to be delisted, there are going to be 3 strikes, which to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. We have good DECIs who do good work and they take their responsibility very serious. So, but I mean, that is a requirement of the ordinance. If the people don't do their job as far as a DECI is concerned, there is the possibility of getting delisted. So now, when is a DECI required for regulated development in Lake County? So just to be clear, the DECI is only in Lake County. If you do work in other counties, they have different ordinances, different requirements. So you should check with that community to see what the requirements are for regular inspections. But in Lake County, a DECI is required when the development exceeds 10 acres of hydrologic disturbance or exceeds 1 acre of hydrologic disturbance and has regulatory floodplain or wetlands, whether they are isolated waters of Lake County or waters of the U.S., on site or on adjoining property. There is also the possibility that a DECI is required at the discretion of the enforcement officer when the development is less than or equal to 1 acre of hydrologic disturbance and has regulatory floodplain or wetlands on site or on adjoining property. You can find this information in the Watershed Development Ordinance, and you should study this section before taking the exam. At the discretion of the enforcement officer, if the enforcement officer feels that the site is sensitive and that has potential for negative impacts, then it's their prerogative to ask for a DECI when the disturbance is less than 1 acre. Okay, so what are now you've gone through the process, you've become a DECI, what are your responsibilities? Well, one is to inspect the site or in the active construction site every 7 calendar days and within 24 hours of a storm event with greater than or equal to ½ inch of rainfall or liquid equivalent precipitation. So if it's like now, if we're in the winter, you can check to see if it's, the snow event is ½ an inch of liquid equivalent precipitation, and then you will do an inspection as well. And to keep a written log of inspections with pictures. And I put up there a small excerpt from one of the SMC letters. So for one of the projects that we permit, we require the DECI shall provide weekly reports. At a minimum, the reports should include photographs and evaluation of critical areas as directed by the SMC inspector, including dewatering activities, verifying no wetland impacts, and utilization of appropriate SCSE methods. And just to let you know, SMC sends out reports for rainfall events. If you want to receive them, please email me or Jeff Laramie of our office to be added to the email list. Also, if you just prefer to use your own, feel free to use any reliable weather app that shows precipitation accumulation, and that includes winter events. Show critical areas and areas of improvement recommendations in your inspection reports. Tell us the story of what it is and is not working on the site and what needs to be improved. Notes and checklists are important, but pictures are vital. When I look at DECI reports for the projects, I'm overseeing, I go straight to the pictures. Then I go back and kind of read the notes in the log, but I go straight to the pictures because it's the easiest way to kind of evaluate what's going on. So, so I wanted to kind of bring up, we had a couple of amendments regarding the DECI responsibilities, and I wanted just to go through them quickly. So the Watershed Development Ordinance has been amended to include a couple of requirements for DECIs. Amendment 5A specifies that the DECI inspection documentation will include photos along with the report. In the previous version, the inclusion of photos were at the discretion of the enforcement officer. So minimum documentation shall include, it's not a choice anymore, site observation and a sufficient number of photographs depicting the conditions of the entire site, inspector's name, date and time of inspection, status of perimeter control, and site outlet observations. The amendment also removed the list of DECI inspections and clarified that these will be done 7 calendar days and after half-inch rain or liquid equivalent precipitation for winter events. So there's 2 parts to this amendment. This is the first part. And in the report, all relevant SCSC measures need to be accounted for, such as the construction entrance, silt fence, inlet protection, ditch checks, dewatering if it's applicable, detention basin, and anything and everything else that's being used on the site. Please don't forget to include the name of the inspector and date and time of the inspection. And the DECI reports at SMC or just the DECI reports that are out there varied quite a bit in the amount of photos included and the amount of information provided. And this amendment should create a more uniform reporting. So here's what the changes were like in the part where we kind of clarified when each inspection should be done. That was a little bit of overkill. So that has been removed. And now it's clarified that it's every 7 calendar days and after half-inch of rain or snow equivalent. And we clarify exactly what kind of information should go now into the reports. So now this amendment has been approved and is now part of the new ordinance, and you can find that document again on the SMC website. So the second part of this same amendment removes the reference to the notice of termination from the section regarding reducing the DECI inspections. So inspections after half-inch of rain and liquid equivalent precipitation still remain as part of the DECI requirement, but we removed that reference because not all SMC permits have IEPA permits. If inspections are required under the IEPA permit, these still need to be completed as required by the NPDES permit. So then again, this amendment is part of the ordinance and you can look at it and study it, excuse me, and have it at your disposal in the ordinance in the PDF format on the SMC website. So what are some other DECI responsibilities? To keep an enforcement officer approved soil erosion sediment control plan at the development site. Also to notify the enforcement officer within 24 hours of when the site is not in compliance with the ordinance or the approved SCSC plans. Also propose corrective measures and recommend additional SCSC prevention measures as necessary. I cannot stress how important it is. The communication is key between all parties involved, the regulatory agency, the applicant, and the contractor. And documentation with pictures is just as important. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat. So required inspections. When are we to inspect these sites? Obviously, after the completion of installation for SCSC measures and prior to proceeding with any other earth disturbance or grading. And as clarified earlier, The routine inspections every 7 calendar days and within 24 hours of half-inch precipitation. Or in our case now, equivalent liquid precipitation for winter events. If there are multiple events of half-inch of rain in 1 week, do an inspection after each one. So the DECIs might be on site multiple times in 1 week. Let's say, your routine inspection is on a Tuesday, hasn't rained in a while, but then you'll get rain event on Wednesday or Thursday. You may have to be out there, 24 hours after that rain event if it qualifies. So you might be on site a couple of days or a couple of times in a week to make sure that everything is working and we're not having issues. So the DECI inspection report, you can use any format you like. SMC does have a report available on the DECI webpage. And you don't have to use this report, but it is posted for your use if you so choose. It's on the DECI webpage, and the document is locked, but you can unlock it and be able to edit and add pictures. I know some people have had trouble with that, but just do a search for unlock the document and then remove the locks, and then you can just use this for your use on whatever inspection you have to do. You don't need to email me anymore to obtain it, and please include pictures. Actually, you don't have a choice anymore. The ordinance requires it now. And like I said, you can use any format you want. However, for written reports, the writing must be legible. I've had trouble before reading some people's handwriting, so be as clear as you possibly can. When are DECIs done inspecting? Well, after permanent stabilization and enforcement officer approval of the as-built plans. And not all permits have an as-built requirement, so check your permit letter to see if it's required by the permit. And sometimes only an email from the design engineer is required stating that the project has been built per plan. But then again, you would have to check your permit letter to see what those requirements are. So permanent stabilization, what does that mean? For SMC as-built approval requirements, 70% aerial coverage of vegetation, of which at least 50% must be the desired species. So now this has been amended a few years ago to be more in line with the IEPA requirement. Our previous requirement was 90% vegetation coverage, but it is now 70%, so we're in line with the IEPA permit. Obviously, there should be no erosion, sedimentation, or unstabilized areas. I mean, these include stockpiles if are going to be left for prolonged periods of time. Also, the SCSC, the temporary measures need to be removed. So after permanent site stabilization has been achieved, this includes any silt fence that's remaining, perforated risers, ditch checks, construction entrances. They all have to be removed in order for the permit to be closed out. You need to coordinate with the regulatory agencies for permit closeout when requirements are met and see if there are any punch list items that still need to be addressed before the permit can be closed. So this is kind of in a nutshell what the Designated Erosion Control Inspector Program is all about. So before we move on, I would like to know if there's any questions. Tim, if you can unmute yourself and let me know, or if there's any questions that we can answer in this first part of the presentation.
Morning, May. I don't see anything yet.
Okay, well, if you can think of anything and something pops in your mind, both Tim and I are available, after the presentation as well to answer whatever questions, whatever clarity you need. We're here. Or even if you think something after the presentation is like, man, I wish I would have asked that, shoot us an email or give us a call and we can answer those questions for you.
Mayor, we do have one that a couple that came in.
Okay.
First, can a Wisconsin resident become a DECI?
Yes, I don't think why not. You can, actually, I think we have some Wisconsin residents that are DECIs, as long as you have, you meet the requirements of taking the exam, showing the 2 years experience, and attending one of our webinars or approved courses, yes, you can live anywhere you want and do work in Lake County.
Thank you. This is a good one. When did they move from 90% to 70% coverage for a site to be
I want to
stabilized?
say, and Tim, maybe you can remember, I think it's been a couple of years now.
It has. It was basically
Like
to
2 or 3,
match the
right? I think
NPDES requirements.
correct. I want to say 2 to 3 years ago, we've amended the ordinance to kind of be more in line with the NPDES ILR 10 permit.
Right.
So, like, if you really need an exact date, I'll have to go back and see when that amendment was changed. But I want to say 2 to 3 years ago.
I will look for that while I.
Okay.
There's several more. When is this year's DECI workshop?
So this year's DECI workshop will be February 13th. I will send a registration link with information. It'll be very similar to this one. It'll be a Zoom virtual webinar. I will send some information by the end of the month. And we have some good presentations. And it's going to be, again, from about 8 a.m. until 1 p.m. with a few breaks in there. But yeah, I have not sent out the registration information yet. I am finalizing the agenda and wanting to make sure that I have everything in order before I open it for registration.
Okay, multiple more questions here. Would environmental inspection training from another state, Michigan, count towards the training hours for the DECI recertification?
I mean, anything that's really SCSC related, I am not picky. And it doesn't really matter. Water flows how water flows, no matter which part of the country you're at. So anything that's soil erosion and sediment control related, it can be from any part of the country. A lot of people do the IDOT trainings. They go to different webinars. I mean, anything from StormCon, IECA, anything that's really SCSC related.
Thank you, Maya.
Okay.
Will a precipitation event inspection cover the weekly inspection so long as there are no further precipitation events that week?
If you're lucky enough that, your event falls on your weekly inspection, then yes. However, like I said, if you have your weekly, let's say on a Tuesday, but it rains on a Thursday, you're expected, and it meets a half inch, you're expected to be there on Friday.
Right. Okay. Does the field experience requirement need to be on projects within Lake County?
No, no, we've had people who have done work outside of the county and outside of the state, but as long as you can prove in that one statement of qualifications that you've done, you've inspected silt fence and ditch checks and basins and stabilization and anything and everything, as long as you can convince us that, yeah, I have the experience, I have done the work in the field to prove that I have the experience, that experience will count.
Thank you, ma'am. Can you take the DECI exam at any time before you obtain 2 years experience, or will it only count after 2 years?
Absolutely. You can take the exam at any time. If it takes you 2 years to get the experience, as long as we have a record that you have taken the exam, that'll count.
Okay. Does the air temperature during site visit need to be documented? I'll take this one, actually. It would be helpful to record whatever type of site situation is you're dealing with during an active rain, storm event, whatever. Not necessarily the temperature of the site. You can add that if you'd like, but we would like to know the conditions that were done during the inspection, encountered during the inspection.
Yeah, sometimes you can see in the inspection report, they put the temperature, 75 degrees and sunny, or, -11 and a snowstorm. But yeah, it would be helpful to at least know, okay, this is why it's happening. These are the conditions during the inspection.
I think I missed one here. Do you recommend any apps for precipitation data?
So I personally use Weather Underground, but also this is why I mentioned that we do have a map that we send out after the precipitation event. So if you want to be on that list, You can email me or Jeff Laramie or even Tim to be added to the list that kind of shows accumulation of precipitation for the previous rain event. So I use Weather Underground, how accurate it is. You know, a lot of times like they don't really know how much rain we're going to get until it's right on top of us. But those are kind of the options out there. And you can use any local rain gauge that you feel is trustworthy.
Okay, let's see. I understand rain events. However, when it snows heavily, what are some examples of good quality checks? For example, when it rains heavy, can you see sediment movement?
Yeah.
However, when you get a large snow, would that be a good to look out for?
So obviously, a lot of times what Tim and I consider temporary stabilization. So right now, a lot of the sites are snow covered, which we consider that they're temporarily stabilized under snow cover. However, just in an inspection yesterday, because of the heavy snow cover, a lot of the sill fence or the fabric tends to peel off the stakes. So that's something that you can sometimes check, or if not check right away, as soon as you have an opportunity for the snow to melt, you can go and see if the sill fence is in good condition. So those are the kind of things. So right now we're in a situation where it snowed heavily, it froze, and then next week we're getting quite a bit of rain. So there's a potential for very damaging conditions to happen on any active construction sites out there. So those are some of the things to look for, silt fence condition, if there's any other perimeter control. And as soon as it melts, obviously discharge offsite.
Perfect. There's an invitation here for anyone if you work around lakes or wood lakes. There's a invitation with a link for.
I'm sorry, there's somebody who is unmuted and we can hear your background conversation. Can you please check your microphone and mute yourself, because we can hear your background conversation. And Tim, if you can see somebody who's unmuted, can you please mute them for me?
Yeah, I don't see who it is. Let me take a look here.
You guys started.
Oh, it's Pat Maddox. Pat, mute yourself, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Another one. Are snowfall totals equivalent to rainfall totals when figuring out if a precipitation event report is needed?
So it depends on the type of snow we get. The wetter the snow, the less the ratio. Usually it's 1 to 10, but not always. Like a really heavy wet snow, the ratio is obviously going to be less, but the dry, like kind of like with this weather that we had where the snow is really dry and like very fluffy, the ratio will be much bigger. So it really depends on the type of snow we get. So you may have to check some weather apps and even check with us to see if we have that information of what the ratio of is, to know if it's the same as half-inch rain.
Yeah, Jeff does a good job summarizing that in his reports, after action reports.
So if you're not on the list, it's really good information. I know he's not Bob Gardner, but he does a darn good job. Email us and you can get on that list so you can get the reports from him after the rain events.
And lastly, we have somebody else got in. Hold on. Typically 1 inch of snowfall equals 0.10 inch of rain and so on.
Right.
Is that something Jeff would put out in his reports? Yeah, I think you just answered that.
Yes, I think he would. If he's got that information handy, he will put it there. Is the general rule 1 to 10? Yes, but not always.
Certainly not last weekend's.
Right.
I know, I shoveled. All right, that looks like it's it, man.
Okay, very good. Well, so we are going to move in the second part of our, thank you, Tim, second part of our presentation where we look at some typical SCSC measures. The list is not by all means exhaustive. Each site will be unique. And the Illinois Urban Manual has an extensive list of practices, and it's a wonderful resource. I put the link up there. If you're not familiar with the manual, I suggest you get very familiar with it because it's a wonderful, wonderful resource, and it goes into so much detail that we cannot cover on this presentation. So we are going to highlight some of the more common practices you'll most often see in the field and how to inspect them properly. All details should be listed on the erosion and sediment control plan for the development, so please refer to those when having specific questions about the measures. We're not going into specific details in this presentation. As mentioned, the Illinois Urban Manual has everything you need listed. While inspecting these practices, communication with both the contractor and the enforcement officer for the community are very important in resolving non-compliance issues. The best time to highlight expectations is during the pre-construction meeting. A good practice is to invite the relevant contractors and discuss sensitive areas as well as maintenance of the SCSC measures. Also, at the pre-construction meeting, the sequence of construction should also be discussed. Doing things in the correct order will solve so many issues down the road. As a DECI, you may be required at times to recommend additional practices other than what is shown on the plan. You will need to update the plan with these new measures if you require them. Please use all the resources at your disposal to resolve field problems, including SMC staff. We are always available to answer questions. Now, all of these practices we are going to talk about work in conjunction with each other. Not one practice will solve all problems. It's better to prevent soil from eroding in the first place than deal with sedimentation issues later. Look at the big picture first and determine where practices are most likely to fail. Even the best design plan will not prevent all erosion and sedimentation issues from happening. Use your resources to try different measures if what's designed is not working properly. Try to have disturbed areas stabilized as soon as possible. It will solve many of your problems. And as we're starting, we're going to talk first about a stabilized construction entrance. So for those of you brand new, I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of experience, but for those brand new and who are just looking to enter the wonderful realm of soil erosion sediment control, a stabilized construction entrance is used at an entrance and exit points for the construction areas as a means of minimizing track out onto the local roads. Please check detailed page for the required length and thickness of stone. Please make sure the contractor uses filter fabric under the stone, otherwise the stone may sink. A minimum of 3-inch rock should be used. Anything smaller will not function properly. What are some inspection pointers for this measure? Check that the proper length has been installed. Check the filter fabric has been installed underneath. Throughout the construction process, new and cleaner rock may need to be added, especially if there is a lot of precipitation during the construction process. Check for tracking onto roads. Sweeping may be needed. So at entrance and exit points, just having the construction entrance is not sometimes enough. You may have to have a sweeper if the tracking has already happened and to clean the local roads from any debris or mud or anything that may be tracked from the construction site. And you know that this measure has failed when rock is no longer visible and there's tracking onto the roads. So when you can't see that white rock anymore, that means it's too dirty. Top dressing of rock may be needed. And it's really, really important to have that fabric underneath. If you don't, as contractors, you may spend a small fortune trying to top dress that and keep it properly and working because the stone will keep sinking. The all familiar silt fence, it's used as a perimeter barrier around the development on the downslope of all disturbance. SMC has a silt fence detail on its website under the checklist and design guidance. You can print or save and use it for your reference. The Illinois Urban Manual is another source for details for this measure. Please check the plan to see where the designer planned for it. Additional may be needed if dictated by the site conditions. Do not be afraid to point out where additional is needed, even if the engineer does not call it out. And both Tim and I have run into that in the field where the field conditions, just really ask for additional silt fence to be installed, and have a discussion with the contractor. If you're the DECI and not the contractor, have the discussion with the contractor and the engineer, if it makes sense to prevent, sedimentation from leaving the site. Some inspection pointers for silt fence: making sure that the silt fence is AASHTO certified. You can check the shipping details from the manufacturer. But the truth of the matter is that most often the silt fence is already installed by the time you inspect it. Most often the fabric will not meet the certification. It may still work, but not to the best standards. Make sure you check the stake spacing. Should not exceed 5 feet apart. Additional staking may be needed. Ask for additional stakes to be installed if they're needed. If they're more than 5 feet apart, ask the contractor to add additional stakes to make sure that the silt fence is properly supported. Check that the fabric is buried and silt fence is trenched in. And I cannot even tell you how many times, especially when the weather gets cold, that fabric does not get trenched in. And it's kind of there for show, but not for a practical purpose. So what you can do the pull test. If you can't visually see it, that it's not been trenched in, you can do the pull test. Pull up the fabric. You should not be able to pull it from the soil, and ask for it to be trenched in if the contractor has not done so already. Check to see like where two ends meet. Check to see that are wrapped properly, as no gap is observed. So stakes should be wrapped around each other, so there's no gap in the silt fence through which the sediment can leave. And throughout the construction process, the silt fence may get knocked down. Ask for repairs to be made. It's not one that you install and forget. You have to keep checking, and if continuous repairs need to be made, then you as a DECI need to ask for those repairs to be made. Basket inlet protection. It's used for curb and drop inlets, and they come in various shapes and sizes and normally have an overflow protection which prevents street flooding. Check the plan to see what the engineer or designer recommended. The type should be on the details page of the soil erosion sediment control. What are some inspection pointers for this measure? Check that all active inlets in the construction area are being protected. Not all may be shown on the plan. You may need to identify if extras are needed and where they should be added. Do not substitute fabric under the lid for baskets. It's not an approved practice by SMC anymore. However, it will be okay for a temporary practice until baskets can be installed. I know some of us ran into some supply chain issues last year or the year before, where literally the baskets were ordered, but they never arrived because they were back ordered. So some protection is better than nothing. Alternatively, if not putting fabric under the lid, you can use some straw wattles around the inlets to provide some extra protection until those baskets can be installed. Also, check for how full the basket is during the construction. Recommendation is to empty the basket when it's a quarter full. Also, if you have a long project, the fabric may clog and new baskets may need to be installed. So if there's a lot of, sediment-laden water going into these baskets, that fabric that you see there gets clogged and it no longer filters anything. So you need to check, and you can remove the sediment, but that will not take care of the fabric. So new baskets may need to be put in. Try to prevent sediment from getting there in the first place. Baskets are usually the last line of defense before water gets into the stormwater system. Ditch checks. Normally used in ditches or concentrated areas of flow, such as swales. They come in different shapes and different materials. The engineer or designer will specify which one to use. If it's a lengthy slope, check to see if they are spaced correctly. I'm going to go slow on this one. The bottom of the upslope check should line up with the top of the downslope one. So the bottom of the upslope check should line up with the top of the downslope one. Illinois Urban Manual has some guidance if none is provided in the plans. And depending on the type, check manufacturer specification on installation. Some require staking, others don't. So what are some inspection pointers when inspecting ditch checks? Make sure they have a smile on them. The ends go up the slope. Water will usually bypass the check if the ends are not high enough. You may need to put two together to achieve proper installation. If using a non-porous material, such as in a triangular silt dike, water pulling behind is a good sign. Make sure the water does not flow underneath. It is a sign that the ditch check is not anchored properly. Personally, I prefer porous types such as straw wattles and other roll devices, as they are more flexible and allow for additional filtration. Water will go through them. They work best if blanket is used in conjunction under the checks so erosion doesn't occur in the swale, such as in the pictures, or vegetation is undisturbed. So yeah, the best thing to do is to really check the manufacturer's specification as far as like that bottom picture, if staking is required and where staking should take place. Erosion control blanket. This is a temporary cover made of degradable material that can cover disturbed areas until vegetation growth takes place. It's made of different materials such as straw, coconut or wood fiber, or a combination. They come in different thickness, and the engineer will specify which kind should be used based on site conditions and slope. Plan should have installation details and guidance. Make sure that the landscape contractor uses the design type. Inspection pointers, and absolutely Tim can chime this at the end of our presentation. It drives him crazy when the blanket is not quote unquote keyed in, meaning it's not buried on the upslope end. And I do have a detail on the next slide, and we can take a look at it, how it should be properly installed. Make sure that the end areas overlap as per details, 4 inches. Tenting. Blanket does not have full contact with the soil. It usually happens because the grade is not well prepared. Sticks, stones, and other materials make the blanket tent up. Peeling, we see this after installation, especially if there's high wind. Normally happens after installation if not enough staples were used, the blanket was not properly keyed in, and not properly overlapped. You need to have the contractor address those areas if the blanket has peeled off, either restake it or install new blanket. So here is the detail for erosion control blanket. As you can see, keying in takes place at the top where it has to be buried. It even says a bury upslope end of blanket in the trench 6 inches wide by 6 inches deep. If this is not buried up top, especially if you are on a slope, water can get underneath it and you can have a lot of erosion under the blanket. A lot of times on detention basin walls, what you'll see is a lot of slumping where the soil erodes and just goes in a pile at the bottom of the slope. So please use, I do believe in Illinois Urban Manual, and maybe Tim at the end, correct me if I'm wrong, this is also available on the SMC website as well. It's a good detail, and the best thing to do is to discuss this with the landscape contractor to make sure that this is done correctly. So yeah, talk to the installing contractor to make sure that this is done properly and enough staples are put in. This should be done before the contractor gets on site. It'll be more work to fix things later. And the details in the Illinois Urban Manuals also shows staple spacing and depth, which are not pictured here. Oh, my favorite is dewatering. Site dewatering is one of the most problematic and critical issues that show up on construction sites. It has the potential for sediment-laden water discharges off-site and therefore non-compliance. A dewatering bag alone will not usually get the job done. It's a combination of measures that will work. We highly, highly recommend getting polymers as part of the dewatering setup. If you are a designer, including this as part of the bid would be essential and would save you a lot of money in the long run if dewatering will become a major issue during construction. Talk to the contractor as a DECI. Talk to the contractor at the beginning of the project and ask what kind of dewatering setup they have and discuss alternatives to ensure compliance. It is much, from my experience, it's a lot more expensive once you start a project and polymers are not part of that dewatering bid, and all of a sudden the regulatory agency, whether it's SMC or another municipality, another it could be IEPA, or it could be the Corps, or it could be the municipality you work in. If they're asking that polymers be involved because the discharge from dewatering is sediment laden, there is no choice. You have to use it, and it could get a lot more expensive to do things after the fact, as compared to, putting some polymers as part of the bid, knowing that the dewatering will be a big part of the project. What are some inspection pointers for dewatering? Check water quality before it goes in and how it comes out to evaluate if filtration is working. May have to scale up if water quality appears the same. Details on plans are usually minimal. It may be up to the DECI and the contractor to put a good dewatering system together. Flog hogs or similar setups also work very well due to polymer usage. This detail that you see here was put together by SMC and is available on the website under checklists and design guidance. And also I wanted to mention that there is a dewatering workshop set up at the Cane du Page Soil and Water District on January 31st. Please check their website for details. It'll be a good resource for you to get additional training if you are not very familiar with this BMP. Perforated riser. Used in detention basins outlets for flow off-site. It's usually the last line of defense in a treatment train for project involving a detention basin. You can find the detail on the SMC website under checklists and design guidance. And some of the inspection pointers for the perforated riser. Make sure the pipe is mortared in place. Ensure there are enough holes in the standpipe. Many times there are too few, not allowing the water to pass through. Ensuring that there is an appropriate fabric installed, non-woven filter fabric, otherwise water will not flow up. Use chicken wire to hold the fabric in place. Duct tape or any other type of tape is not appropriate. Also ensure that there's a trash rack in place. If there is a lot of sediment in the detention basin, the fabric may clog up over time and may need to be replaced. Don't forget to remove it once the site is permanently stabilized and the enforcement officer gives you the go-ahead. You know this measure has failed if the fabric is clogged or missing. Sometimes the contractor wants to remove this measure early. It should remain in place until permanent stabilization is achieved and you have 70% vegetation coverage. And last but not least, permanent stabilization. A site is considered permanently stabilized when the vegetation coverage has reached 70%. Check plans for seed mix to see if a combination of annual and native plants are called for. Talk to your contractor to ensure seed mix is followed. Some inspection pointers for this measure. The way to check permanent stabilization status is that if you would throw a hula hoop circle anywhere on the site. So if you just had a hula hoop circle and you threw it anywhere on the site, the vegetation inside it would cover 70% of the circle. Native vegetation may take a while to establish. Vegetation needs to be evenly established without bare patches. If there are any remaining stockpiles on site, they will have to be permanently stabilized as well prior to closing the permit. If you have any doubts when a site is considered permanently stabilized, you can check with the enforcement officer. Well, this concludes the presentation on the most basic SESC measures. I wanted to put up some useful websites for you And again, the slide deck will be available on the DECI webpage, so you can access these links after the presentation. For Illinois Urban Manual, obviously, the SMC checklist and guidance webpage that I've mentioned several times, that's also available, and the DECI webpage is available as well. Use these resources to learn about SCSE measures highlighted in this presentation and many others we have not discussed. SMC staff, myself and Tim Cook are also great resources if you have questions. Please stay for the question and answer session to receive your training certificate. And again, this presentation slide deck will be posted on the DECI webpage along with the recording. And if you want to pass this along to any colleagues that might be interested in becoming a DECI, that would be greatly appreciated. So now for the second part of our presentations, both Tim and I are available to answer whatever questions you might have about these measures. And I'm sorry, I can't see the chat, so I'm relying on Tim to read them off again. Or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's okay too.
Hey, Maya, Tim's doing something,
All right.
so I can.
I got it now.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Sorry,
Yes.
I had done myself double muted. To catch back up, do you always require double silt fence along adjacent wetland perimeters?
No. However, it is a good practice, and a lot of times it's the designer who puts a double row, and it really depends on what comes out in the review of the permit. So a lot of times, us at SMC, as we review the permits that require permitting through SMC, if we see a core wetland or a high quality wetland that it's on site or just near off site, we may require to have a double row of silt fence. So it really depends on one, what happens during the review process, two, what the engineer puts on the plans. And also, if let's say only one row is required, but it keeps getting knocked down and there's a high probability of an impact getting a wetland getting impacted, then the inspector or you as a DECI may require a double row of silt fence.
Okay. Is filter fabric an acceptable form of inlet protection or only a temporary measure?
Tim, you want to take this one?
Yeah, it's really a temporary measure. The last couple of years, then there's been a shortage of product, and it's continuing on through 2024. So it's really site specific. There's not a yes or a no to this. Generally, what we see permitted from our offices and most other enforcement officers is the drop filter inlet protection.
Right.
But again,
And
site specific.
absolutely. And you know what? You do have other options. A lot of times you can use like a heavier um, rolled product that you can put around an inlet if baskets aren't available. Really, with fabric, it clogs very quickly and it backs up water. It doesn't allow for drainage, and you can get yourself into a kind of street flooding situation that it's best avoided. So if you don't have the baskets, I would say one, check with your contractor to see what else it has available. And also you can check with the enforcement officer for that project to see what they would allow in lieu of a basket.
Okay, this is a good one. Can an inspector be held responsible for prescribing a failed SESC measure that is not on the plans or part of the permit? If so, what are some ways to avoid fingers being pointed at the inspector? For example, stay away from using terms like required, but use terms like recommended or highly
Right,
suggested.
right.
I can actually respond to this.
Yes,
The DECI is actually reporting back to the enforcement officer for whatever community you're in. It may be SMC, it may be a village enforcement officer, it may be unincorporated enforcement officer. So the DECI is suggesting what they think might be applicable to a site, and it's the enforcement officer who's requiring that. Now, there's other instances where the DECI has much more leeway and work directly with the contractor. But I would certainly run that past the enforcement officer before requiring anything.
Yeah, I mean, I even question myself when I'm on a construction site and I say, okay, based on my professional experience and field experience that I've had for many years, this is what I think will work best. Am I 100% of the time correct? No, but I am using my best judgment to make a recommendation given the site conditions, given the issues, given maybe weather patterns as to when um, that project is ongoing. But yes, in the end, the DECI can recommend, and we've had both Tim and I, we've had reports where the DECI could be recommending the same measure again and again, and it's not being followed. Then it's up to that enforcement officer to say, hey, this needs to happen, or this construction can't move forward anymore until this is addressed. So yes, as a DECI, use your best knowledge. You use whatever you have at your disposal to make the best recommendation you can in order to keep that construction site in compliance.
Thanks, ma'am. Okay, for dewatering, what are Lake County SMC requirements for notifications?
So I think in a lot of our projects, one of the conditions in the permit is that SMC has to be notified prior to dewatering starting. A lot of times when we have in-water projects, a dewatering plan and a cofferdam plan needs to be approved. And I'm strictly talking about projects that are issued by SMC. In other villages, whatever the village requires to do, it's whatever the village requires to do. But for SMC projects, your coffering and dewatering plan needs to be approved by SMC before it can be installed and the project can move forward with that portion of the construction. Am I correct in that, Tim?
Yeah, you are. It is an SMC requirement on our projects, and working with usually during the pre-construction meeting,
Right. Especially if you know you're going to have an in-stream project.
right, we need that submitted prior to and approved by the inspector prior to.
Correct. And I would highly suggest that it's a half-day workshop on dewatering, and you have the most brilliant minds in erosion and sediment control presenting at this webinar at the end of the month in Cane du Page. Just Google Cane du Page Soil and Water District and look when this for the registration for this workshop. I am going as well. I am always learning and always want to know how we can best address this very, very difficult measure out in the field. It's the most problematic and the hardest one to manage out of all the SCSC measures out there.
For sure. Okay, is one long run of silt fence or multiple J-hooked runs preferable in a relatively flat area?
Well, usually it depends on the site conditions. The ordinance requires that silt fence be installed in the downslope of all the disturbance. Sometimes designers, put it all the way around, just more for visual effect than anything else. But it really depends on site conditions. It depends on the slope. It depends on how much water will be going in that part of the construction. It depends on a lot of things. And usually the designer, knowing how the sequencing will go, hopefully, between him and the reviewing agency, will make that call as to how much silt fence and whether J-hook or not, or multiple lines of silt fence be used. But also, this is what I'm saying as well as a DECI. Look at the big picture, see what the slope is, see where the water's going, see where you think is the weakest point of the construction site. And then you may have to have multiple measures installed in that area to make sure that the sediment or the sediment laden water doesn't leave the site through that weakest point. It really kind of depends on the site conditions. There's no one one measure fits all, unfortunately. I wish we did, but unfortunately we don't.
Okay, thank you, Maya.
Yep.
Both our email addresses have been provided.
So only mine is up there, but Tim's is it's tcook,
It's up there,
TCOOK.
Maya.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, at lakecountyil.gov. We are good resources. We don't mind answering questions. So if you have specific questions or you get in a bind and you need an opinion, please feel free to contact us as well.
Okay, the next question is the WDO updated from, I keep jumping ahead here, 2020. I can answer that. The latest version of the WDO is dated 7/11/2023.
Correct. We had just gone through a series of amendments, including floodplain maps last year. And that document it's now uploaded on the SMC website with a new cover and everything. So if you don't have the latest version, I would head over to the website and it's a PDF, so you can save it on your computer. So you have the latest version with all the new amendments included, including the DECI amendments.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in.
Okay. Well, I know we went a little bit over time, but I really welcome and I appreciate all the questions that we received today because I think they're really important. And I really appreciate you taking the time and being interested in the program because we need all of you out there, doing good work and making sure that we keep our county's water resources clean and also pass on the knowledge to the next generation to learn about soil erosion sediment control. So we have a clean environment that all of us can enjoy. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And if you would wait for a little bit, I will post the PDF of the certificate in the chat box. And again, if you're on a mobile device and you can't download it, feel free to email me after this presentation and I will email you your certificate. Thank you very, very much. And I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you all in about a month, 3 weeks or so at the annual DECI webinar.